Awesome. We thank you so much, Dr. Curtis. Now, for the benefit of those who might not know, let me just tell you a little bit about Caribbean Regional Midwives Association, what it is that we're about, some may wonder. Now, the Caribbean Regional Midwives Association, we are a non-government regional midwifery association. We're committed to educating, supporting, and strengthening professional midwifery associations regionally. And as such, we have been conducting a series of webinars on topics relevant to the care and management given by the midwives to the childbearing population. The purpose of this and other webinars is to update and educate midwives on mental health, particularly perinatal loss and grief. What are our objectives for tonight? We're going to discuss the lived experience of mothers with a perinatal loss, and that would have been in Trinidad and USA. Describe the role of support groups for parents and perinatal loss, and also explore the clinical and psychosocial aspects of the roles of the midwife in the management of clients with perinatal loss. So there you have it. That is what we are all about tonight. And we are going now to hear from a lady who you might look at her and you will see midwifery all over her, a beautiful being. And I'm speaking about Dr. Pandora Hartman, who serves as Chief Nursing and Midwifery Officer of JAPICO. She has gained 25 years of nurse midwifery experience working in the USA, the Caribbean, Southeast Asia, to provide the Middle East and Africa in varying capacities, assisting women and families on 4 continents. She has worked closely with ministries of health and midwifery organizations to provide strategic direction, clinical pragmatic assistance for the design and implementation of global, regional, and country-level midwifery, maternal and sexual reproductive health programs. When in the US, she also serves as a supplemental midwifery staff, bringing a global perspective to her clinical care of ethnically and socially diverse clients in metropolitan areas. Tonight, I introduce to you Dr. Pandora Hartman. Kindly give her your full attention. Dr. Hartman, over to you.
Thank you so much, colleagues, midwives and supporters of midwives. This evening, I bring you warm greetings from MCGL. That's that mixed up acronym for the Momentum Country and Global Leadership Program, which is USAID's flagship maternal health, child health program that is working so beautifully hand in hand with CRMA in multiple platforms. We are delighted in continuing to partner to address critical issues around mental health issues. All issues surrounding maternal health have come more into the forefront. In January 2020, if any of you were looking at the Elle magazine, Queen Bey came forth, our beloved Beyonce, and her quote struck me. When she talked about this area, she said, "Having miscarriages taught me that I had to mother myself before I could mother somebody else." And I think as we're here tonight, that's really one of the important things for us to focus on, because as midwives, we mother everybody else. So this topic is not just about loss, but for the mothers, but our own loss, our own issues with what may be grief. Another favorite of ours from the movie Bring It On, to Bad Boys, any of Bad Boys fans out there, Gabrielle Union. You may have read her memoirs recently. Her memoir 2017 is actually called We Need More Wine. What does that tell you? And she talked about people feeling entitled to know what your personal story is. she revealed that she had suffered from multiple miscarriages over the years and had suffered in pain and silence while she was battling through IVF and infertility that nobody knew. You know, women that we see in front of us, some of our icons that are still dealing with these issues and still afraid to come out of the shadows. So that's part of the reason that we at MCGL are going to continue to keep this issue at the forefront. When I'm done, I'll pop into the chat box a landscape analysis that has been done, where we spent some months pulling together lots of literature that are looking at many angles of this. You'll also see that there was a commentary that was published in BMC Pregnancy and Childbirth and co-authored by one of our own, Diana Henry. It's called Silent No More, which is a global call to action. We know that this is an issue for our region. I'm sitting here talking to you tonight from Georgetown, Guyana, because the data that we do have about our region is a little bit sparse, but the qualitative data we have shows important differences that may be significant in Black Caribbean women's beliefs and attitudes towards health-seeking practices. And you know, there's theories about this may be related to innate mistrust in the healthcare system when we look at the historical impact of what has happened to all of us in the diaspora. Another article is actually called "We Don't See Black Women Here." What does that tell you? And that's looking at the experience of Caribbean women as well and postpartum issues. They just don't see it. So we don't really know what is going on. So as a part of this, as this is our maternal mental health agenda, we're going to keep on pushing and developing more research questions and a robust community of practice that you will be invited to join us. This is how we're going to continue to engage with you and other colleagues in this region to share lessons learned and get more knowledge and experiences. Maternal mental health is an issue that's close to all of our hearts, not just because as midwives, we want to provide stellar, quality, compassionate care, but because we as women are personally impacted. Tonight, we're going to look at it all from multiple perspectives. We know that unattended loss is catalytic for deep trauma and is a major risk factor for poor mental health and worse overall health outcomes for women. We can't isolate anything. And we do know that as midwives, we can and will play a key role in coming out of the shadows so that next time we're going to be able to write in an article, we do see our Black Caribbean women here, and this is what they say. Thank you all for the willingness to partner and work on this critical issue for all of us, and I look forward to continuing this journey. Over to you.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Hartman. Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to move into the meat of the matter tonight as it relates to perinatal loss. Our first presenter of the night is Miss Marsha Carlo, Natasha Carlo. She is the author of Happy Times and Rainbow Babies. She is going to speak to us tonight on lived experiences and from a Trinidad and Tobago perspective. Now, a little about Miss Carlo. Natasha is a wife and mother of 2 rainbow babies. She is an itinerant counselor, lecturer, and author of 2 children's books, Happy Tears and Rainbow Babies, which helps parents discuss child loss with siblings, and Mike, Nero, and the Superhero School, a book about kindness. Sounds interesting, eh? Natasha is a volunteer facilitator with Mama Toto's babies who live only in our hearts support group, and a pregnancy after loss advocate for pregnancy after loss support. She's an international magazine, which is an international magazine dedicated to supporting families through pregnancy loss and subsequent pregnancies. She also writes about grief, loss, and parenting after loss at Her View from Home magazine. I really think tonight we should sit back, we should relax, because Miss Natasha Carlo, I think, has something wonderful to share with us tonight. At this time, Miss Carlo, over to you.
Thank you so very much. Good night, everyone. I would just like to beg your indulgence with me tonight. I am recovering from COVID-19, but I thought this too important to miss. So if at any minute I just have to duck out for a minute, I hope that I have your patience and you'll stay with me, okay? So good night, colleagues. My name is Natasha, and I hope to have an open and clear conversation with you about my experience with loss. The term loss attempts to cover many things. Loss through miscarriage, through stillbirth, loss through early infant death, SIDS, child loss. But in actuality, it fails to even begin to capture the range of experiences contained. My loss included everything from my loss of innocence, my belief that I was capable of doing anything that I set my mind to, the loss of relationships, loss of faith in my relationship with God, and certainly the loss of my trust in the healthcare system and other people in general. But mostly, it covered the loss of the future that I had envisioned for myself and my family. And I also lost the hope of that fairy tale pregnancy where, you know, I ate whatever I wanted and I grew a big fat round belly and I you know, everyone catered to me. Pregnancy has never been that for me. But before I go too far, I think we should start at the beginning. In 2014, my husband and I were newlyweds who got pregnant sometime around our first anniversary. We were overjoyed that we were expecting twins. Our very first pregnancy, we were expecting twins, and we excitedly looked forward to finding out the sex of our babies. We had the full support of our families, friends, churches, co-workers. Everyone was so happy for us. At our routine second trimester scan, instead of finding out the sex of our babies, we found out that both our babies had died without us knowing. The devastation was and still is very real. And so was the silence from everyone around us. People who were excitedly offering to babysit our twins were now avoiding our gaze in public and talking about our misfortunes behind our backs. We had to learn some harsh truths about life. However, a few short months later, we became pregnant again. And even though we knew better than to tell anyone this time around, we were still cautiously excited. Unfortunately, this pregnancy was even shorter than the first time. This time, we carried our pregnancy loss in secret. We were a young couple, and the magnitude of what we were dealing with felt like it would break me, and indeed break my marriage. Thankfully, that was not the case. We attended Mama Tuto's support group, Babies Who Live Only in Our Hearts, a support group run by midwives and women who had also experienced loss. And for the first time, I saw a way forward through my grief. Reliance on our faith and tapping into new supportive networks, we were able to come out the other end. Today, my husband and I are parents to 2 rainbow babies, And if you are not familiar with the term rainbow baby, it refers to a child or baby born after a miscarriage or pregnancy loss. My daughter was born in 2015 and our son was born in 2016. Our family will always acknowledge and miss the babies that we lost. But today, I use my experience with loss to help other people navigate their own loss journey. I do not know that everything happens for a reason, but I am grateful to God for the opportunity to share my story. There's always the temptation when trying to show just how important creating support for families who experience pregnancy loss is to focus on the doom and the gloom and the sadness of loss. And loss is tragic. There's no denying that. But with appropriate support and information that is medically accurate, many families can go on to have their versions of positive, healthy family lives. And that is why we are here today, because we are all part of the way forward. Your intervention in someone's life can bridge the gap between despair and healthy healing. Now, I understand that my experiences alone do not account for much, but I would like to share some conversations that I have had as a grief worker for the past 7 years. 1, the language is problematic. I, like many other lost parents, struggled badly with the language for a long time. You see, I didn't lose my babies. They all died. That may not mean much to you, but there's a major difference there. I suppose there is some attempt to soften the blow, but I assure you, it does not. I didn't carelessly misplace my babies. They all died. Their life was taken from me by circumstances well beyond my control. This issue with language becomes even further complicated because while my husband and I were expecting together, it was Natasha that lost the baby. I've never heard anyone speak of a man losing a baby. Without even realizing it, the language has already created further divide between mothers and fathers experiencing loss. And I can't help but wonder what effect this has on marriages burdened with grief. 2, the experience is isolated. With approximately 1 in 4 pregnancies ending in miscarriage, everyone sitting here knows someone who has experienced the loss. Perhaps many of you sitting here have a personal experience with loss. However, finding someone to discuss your grief with may prove quite difficult. Even when leaving the hospital after my miscarriage, there was no discussion about grief or mental health. In fact, there was no discussion at all, save for one nurse who wished me well and encouraged me to be strong. I have, for the last 4 years, volunteered with Mama Tutu's Babies Who Live Only in Our Hearts support group, which is a group that creates support for families experiencing loss. One of the common themes of our sessions is the incredibly isolating effect of loss. Even among those of us who have experienced loss, it is difficult to know what to say. So many choose to say nothing at all. This isolation can further stigmatize the experience of loss and make it harder for people to even want to access whatever limited resources do exist. And this experience has been made even more isolating by the impact of COVID-19. 3, grief is not the only emotion involved in loss. I expected to feel grief over my losses. That's only natural. Hello?
Natasha?
Yeah?
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yes. What I did not expect to feel was shame. Shame that my body was unable to do what countless women seem to do with ease. Or guilt that I couldn't manage to keep my babies alive. Or an incredible sense of failure. How had I not known that my babies were dead? What type of mother doesn't know that her babies are dead? And of course, fear for the future. While grieving my babies, I worried about future losses. What would happen if I got pregnant again? Or even worse, what if I never got pregnant again? And of course, there was anger. Anger at myself, at the doctors, my husband, and just about anyone who came too close to me. 4, there are cultural differences in loss. Working in the grief and loss community for the past 7 years, I have met and worked with women from many different cultures. And while there are quite a few similarities, there are some differences I thought worth mentioning. In our Caribbean context, child loss is often seen as punishment for biblical crimes committed. Women's wombs are tied to their innate goodness. So if you had a miscarriage, you must have done something terrible. I have personally had to defend myself against this line of thinking. In other cultures, the loss of a child may not bear any such association and is often met with sufficient opportunities for support and resources. And while platforms like this is a great start, and I thank each and every one of you for committing to being here, it has to be said that in the Caribbean, more needs to be done to support families experiencing loss. 5, it is not just medically relevant in subsequent pregnancies. Not only is miscarriage or pregnancy loss or child loss medically relevant, it is emotionally relevant. Pregnancy after loss is the hardest thing I have ever done after my miscarriages. My subsequent pregnancies were filled with anxiety and fear. I tried hard to be grateful and focus on the good, but I was still grieving. My growing belly did not erase the memory of my loss. With each pregnancy milestone met, my grief and anxiety grew. It wasn't always easy to speak for myself and advocate for my needs. At times, I was scared into sitting down and shutting up. Doctors and nurses don't love being questioned by anxious pregnant women. This is where my midwife, Carmen, came in. I thank God for Carmen all the time. Her ability to validate my feelings, not just about my losses, but my upcoming baby, just about saved my sanity. She was the first person who told me it was okay that I didn't feel excited or happy to be pregnant for the 3rd time in less than a year. She held our hands throughout our time with her and helped us understand so much about pregnancy after loss. She taught us how to ask questions and work with our healthcare workers. And this is where you come in. Your intervention can create avenues that help couples advocate for themselves, ask questions, and seek support and resources. You stand in the gap for clients who have been through more than anyone should. I know the work is plentiful and you are stretched beyond your limits. I know. But we need you. Exactly as you are, you can do the work that helps create safe and healing spaces for families like mine. Thank you so much for your time.
We thank you so much. We thank you. Round of applause, Natasha. And I know, as a matter of fact, I felt that presentation. It came from within. And giving you a thumbs up, a round of applause. You can go ahead and put your reactions on the chat, but I want you to save your questions because I'm sure that there's some questions for her. And thank you so much tonight for presenting to us from the heart. We felt that presentation. Tonight, our second presenter, I'll introduce. Yes, Dr.
Sorry. Just to let persons know, if you have questions for Natasha, can you put them in the chat? We will be taking them down, and after our second presenter, we will put those questions forward.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much, Doc, and thank you again, Natasha. Tonight, I'm going to introduce you to another wonderful individual. As the founder of the Shades of Blue project, Kay Matthews and her team are on a mission to uplift all birthing individuals with the care, respect, and dignity they deserve, no matter their social status or birth outcome. We focus on the birthing experience, and this is how we bridge the gaps by acknowledging what everyone's birth story matters. Through education, advocacy, and support, we are dedicated to helping birthing individuals of color whose lives are impacted by racial disparities and amplify their birthing struggles. It is from my own personal experience of infant loss and postpartum depression, and I've recognized a critical diversity gap in mental health resources and emotional support for Black and minority birthing individuals, which are what we are working to dismantle through our work and advocacy. Tonight, I want to present to you Ms. Kay Matthews, who is her topic for tonight is Infant Loss Support Group. Please give her your undivided attention. Ms. Matthews, over to you.
Thank you, Petal, for that wonderful, wonderful introduction. I am very excited to be here tonight. Just want to make sure that everyone can see my screen, can give me a thumbs up or not. Okay, awesome. And so I want to thank Natasha for following you and hearing your story. As many times as I talk about what happened and why I do this work, it's always encouraging to see someone else that looks like me that is doing the same. It is so often that we do not see Black women talking about this experience. And it's necessary because it is happening to so many of us, and we really truly are suffering in silence. So I just wanted to tell you, Natasha, thank you. And so tonight I am going to, I have slides and I am a presenter, but I'm definitely looking forward to the questions and the conversation that is to be had after my presentation, because I feel like that's how we get things moving. That's where the real progress that needs to happen around this topic is going to move forward. So my presentation is really about how do we build this community trust? When we think about just mental health as a whole, how a lot of barriers that exist in mental health come from lack of trust, right? And so how do we build a community of trust that includes mental health, the maternal health aspect, and then you put grief and loss in the midst of that? That's a whole ball of things, right, that we are having to tackle. So that's really what my conversation and presentation is going to be about tonight. A little bit about the Shades of Blue project. We're here to help women before, during, and after childbirth. Education is a key component to that. That's why we work with women before they give birth. So we're educated so we know how to advocate when we feel like something is not right, things are going wrong, even when things are good. That's another thing. Advocacy doesn't always have to be bad. Advocacy can be good too. So having that education and backing can lead to better birthing outcomes, just full circle. But being inclusive, we have an issue in this space about inclusion. We talk about it, but we actually don't put it into practice. So a lot of what I work is about bridging the gaps that currently exist in maternal health, because there's no maternal health without mental health. And so that's one of the biggest things that we are focused on here at the Shades the Blue Project. I always want to share maternal mental health by numbers, because 1 in 7 white women will experience postpartum depression, but as you see, 1 in 4 Black women will experience postpartum depression and maybe not even be diagnosed or acknowledge that there's an issue. That's one of the ways this issue continues to be a problem. And then, why do you think the gaps in these numbers are so huge? Here's a breakdown from the Harvard University. Maternal depression and other perinatal mood disorders are linked to risk factors for maternal morbidity, mortality and morbidity, including hypertension, preeclampsia, gestational diabetes. Mood disorders are prevalent amongst new mothers, particularly women of color who grapple with stressors, racism, coupled with mental health strains resulting from motherhood daily. Studies show that African American and Hispanic mothers who experience maternal depression have higher rates of adversity than their white counterparts. Like I mentioned, there's no maternal health without mental health, because what that statement told us is about what physically happens to women in childbirth and the many things coupled with mental health. But what's missing in that statement is anything about infant loss or grief. I put this slide in here because I think so often when you experience a loss, whether it's miscarriage or in my case, it was a stillbirth, you're not even given a postpartum period. Your birthing experience stops right then and there. For me, I delivered my daughter stillborn. She was full term. And so the things that have to happen when you, I'm in Texas, and the things that you have to go through a whole burial process, you have to get death certificate, you have to do all the things, you have to give baby name, you have to go through this whole entire process, right? And yes, I was definitely experiencing grief. That's a given, right? Because my child died. And so, yes, I am grieving. But I am also a woman who gave birth. And so my body did not shut down at that point, right? I still had all of the things that happen to women in a postpartum period, your milk coming in, all of those bodily functions that the nurses, the doctors, the whole healthcare system, I feel like they don't acknowledge those things. And I was a first-time mom. And so I didn't know any of these things. And so in my immediate circle, the conversation was, oh, that's Kay, you know, she lost her baby, or everything was about the baby, the baby. Meanwhile, I'm yelling, waving my hands in the air, like, what about me? And then my reactions were, you know, seemingly irate to folks, like, well, she's acting like that because she lost her baby. And I was just like, here we go again. Like, what about me? Like, I am the one who is still here. And so I really, when Natasha mentioned about the loss of all the things, I lost so much. It started with my daughter and it just was a trickle down effect. I honestly, to this day, don't even know how my now husband, that we are still together, to be honest with you. It was such a trying time. I mean, I struggled to tell him how to help me because I didn't know how to help myself. And then his ideas of helping me, I just thought that they are a waste of time and energy. What are you talking about? Shut up. Who made you the be all of end all? Although he was trying to help, right? So it just made like this situation like even worse. And I can tell you there was 96 days that we were apart. And yes, I counted. There were 96 days out of the 14 years we have been together that we were not together because I had lost so much, including him and I, and that we had to rebuild. So I had to rebuild my life after that loss. One, I spent an immense long time of trying to get people to even
She
to
just
even
telling you like
listen
that,
to
like
me.
she's sister, she's sister, she's sister.
She asked me if we're working at the web. I said, oh, you know web. And you know communion.
But this
Trying
man
to
what's
find
here?
that person. Mute your mic, please.
You just tell him again.
Junior.
A black man with just sit on the bench. He just
Marcia, can you see who that is?
Monifa Chambers Webb, can we
Chambers.
ask you please to mute your mic? Thank you.
I spent an immensely long time after my loss trying to get people to listen to me. And so my OB, her whole team was a completely different team when I went back in for my follow-up. It's just so many things just changed and I just really couldn't understand what was happening, right? So I was really out here fending for myself, but it also was the push and the drive that I needed to be able to ensure that no woman or no birthing individual goes through what I went through. Although it was my general practitioner, like when I went in for my well woman checkup, that actually listened to me and I had all my facts and I had all my Google state, all the things that I would say that this is what's happening to me. And for somebody to say, yes, you're correct, that's exactly what it was. I got to exhale and then another inhale because now I needed to figure out where was I going to go get help. So this is the thing, my doctor said, yes. Now what do I do, right? So my grief in this instance was delayed. I was not grieving the child that I lost. I was fighting for the person that was still here. And so understanding that process of what happened, all of the things that were associated with the death of my daughter were pushed to the side because I had to fight for the person that was still here, right? And so along the way of, you know, creating and fighting for my own healing, because that's what needed to take place. I, again, in the back of my head is like, when I get better, I'm going to help somebody else. And that's exactly how this work for me has come about. It's not something that I heard about, it's something that I know. And I know what that look of despair looks like on a woman when she is struggling to figure things out. Because I saw that look every time I would pass by a mirror and I would catch a glimpse of myself. I hardly knew who I was. I was lost. And I had to find me first to understand a lot of those things. And so I wanted to make this association that there's this grief that happens in loss. There's also a postpartum aspect to it. And we are not exempt from experiencing postpartum depression, anxiety, any of those things. It's not tied to the baby itself. It's tied to the person who gave birth. And so I want to make that clear because that association is so often just skipped over. We're not tying the two together, and it just leads women to just struggle even more, and it's a very unnecessary thing. And so this is why I continuously say we must be inclusive of all birthing experience, no matter the outcome. It's just that someone's giving birth, so we have to at least acknowledge that piece within itself. And so I am one, we know what the issues are. We have definitely listened to Natasha talk and a little bit of what I said. What can we do? The goal here has to be what action can we spring into? What can we do collectively? Because, and I always say collective effort, because it's gonna take more than one or two of us. It's gonna take a whole lot of us to make this change happen. So I know that from my own experience of trying to find a group that at least one is somebody look like me, and if they look like me, at least we were talking along the same lines in the same language. I was not finding that. So that's a traditional approach. So what I created, again, from my own healing, I told myself one day, what is something that I can do on a daily that could make this all better, that could make me get up out the bed and not stay there and just die. I mean, I literally was just dying. That's just really what it came down to. What could I do on a daily to make this better for myself? I came up with the word inspire. And then I was like, okay, well, it got to be a little bit more than just inspire. Okay, I'm going to inspire myself every day, but what steps am I going to take to make this a process that I do on a daily? And what I did, y'all, is I asked a nonprofit organization if they could please let me share this with other women. Luckily, someone said, yes, by all means, come on in, you know, like, what do we have to lose? That kind of thing. Like, we've never heard this take on support group model. So come on in, and they let me try it. And so This Inspire method that we created is inclusive. It doesn't matter who walks through the door or who we are engaging with. This is something for all. It doesn't matter what happened in the birthing process or what the outcome is. It's something that can just really, truly change how the woman or the birthing individual is feeling full circle. So before we jump into that, this is my healing circle. And when Natasha was talking, it made me think about, these are all of the things that we hear so often. You know, a lot of the conversation leaves out abortion, but when you have an abortion, you can still experience a maternal mental health complication. Our circle of healing kind of stems from a myriad of things. We call it Shades of Blue Project because in mental health, there are different shades of blue. There's different emotions. So you can go from dark to light to somewhere in between. We want to be on this outer piece. We want to extend grace to ourselves, and then it will be easier to extend grace to others. We want to move with a restoration mindset. Like each day we wake up, we're renewing ourselves. We're getting back something that we need to keep moving forward. So this is our healing circle. We're certainly all striving for happiness, but it doesn't always look like that. But just know that that's a process. That's something that happens. Healing is a process. It certainly doesn't happen overnight. And so this is our Inspire method. This is what we have taken and used on a daily basis. The Inspire method is designed for you to do this every day, even if you only do the last part of it, but involve others. That's asking for help or getting help, because it's very hard. It's very difficult to do. It makes us feel uncomfortable, out of place. It's one of those things we struggle with, but it's a very important part of the process. Nourishment and exercise, what we put in our body, what we eat. And I say nourishment because I think about, we work with low-income individuals, and sometimes McDonald's, fast food restaurants are the only thing that they have access to or money for. We cannot condemn them for that, but what we can do is show them other ways to maybe get at that same restaurant, get something different. But learning and understanding food is a big piece of that. And when we think exercise, we think movement. How we get going. You know, movement is dancing, singing. As long as your body and limbs are moving, that's exercise to us. Get up and get moving, even if it's from the bed to the couch, you know, doing just something that gets your body moving. Spirituality and prayer, because we know that religion comes with a lot of barriers sometimes, and religion will keep us stuck in situations that don't need to be as long and as taxing as religion can sometimes hold us back. But we still have to acknowledge that it exists. It exists in our culture alone, but understanding how it can sometimes be harmful as well. And so learning and understanding that. And then patience. None of us are born with patience. It's learned, it's learned, it's learned. You got to breathe through what patience is. So patience is a true big component and process to all of this. A lot of times we know things need to change and things are changing around us, but in order for us to be able to do change for ourselves, we first have to identify it. Once we identify what needs to be changed for ourselves, then we can initiate the change that has to happen. Because one thing we know is change is the inevitable. It is going to happen with or without us. And I know personally, I need it to happen with me. So I need to be a part of that process. Rest and relaxation are not enough. We ain't getting enough rest. Let's be honest with each other, because we in the work, we in this thing. But we have to reclaim our time. At some point, and I say a 15-minute nap in the middle of the day will change your life. We got to reclaim that time. What that rest and relaxation looks like for each of us. It certainly doesn't look like, you know, running on the beach or anything like that. Like being realistic, like writing on a piece of paper that you need a 10-minute break and then posting it so people can see it, right? Finding those many different ways to, again, get the rest and relaxation that you need for yourself. And if you do nothing else at the end of the day, is each day is a new day to start again. What I needed for myself is to stop blaming me. Stop blaming me for what happened. Stop blaming me for all the other things that happened after the loss. You know, I thought everything in the world was my fault. I had to realize that it was not, but I also had to realize that I needed to move forward. I didn't say get over what happened or anything. I just needed to move through. I needed to go forward and not remain stuck in a place that was causing me nothing but harm. And so if I did nothing at the end of Inspire on the daily and I woke up and my eyes open and I was able to move, that's my each day was a new day to start again. And I could start through this process until this just became a part of who I am. This is the method that we use in our organization. This is the method that we use for our support groups. So often I'm asked about folks who want to engage with the infant loss community. What does a support group look like for those who have experienced infant loss? It looks like any other support group. You need to support the people that are there. That's what it looks like. It should not be this huge difference, right? We know that grief is a part of loss, but it is not the only part. There's also happiness that can be associated with loss. There were happy times, there were happy moments that are often sometimes clouded by the bad things. And so that acknowledgement of that piece alone, but I tell folks who are interested in being in the infant loss space, treat it like anything else that you would do, treat it with care, handle it with care, I would say, but don't make it so like this is, something that has to be this broad, different way that you lose the key and the core parts of a support group by focusing on that one little piece. And then what has been our biggest lessons learned over the past 7 years? This piece right here, we do 3 things and we do nothing else. 1, we acknowledge the birth actually happened. We acknowledge the feelings that are associated with it, with the birth itself. We see you and we understand you. And then respect the reactions that come with infant loss. Respect the reactions that come with maternal mental health complications. Respect that, because so often in infant loss, the postpartum period is usually skipped over or cut short anyway. So respecting one's reaction to what they may be feeling and what they may be dealing with, and then support what comes next. Support them wholeheartedly, support them in a way that they need and in a way that they want. It's important to give folks what they need and what they want. The acknowledge, respect, and support is what we stand on. It is what we have used to build throughout this process. It is very important that I see you, I respect you, and how can I support you? It is leading with compassion in every interaction, Facebook. And so when we think about engagement is key. It's how we build rapport. It's how we let folks know that this thing is going to be okay and that you are going to get through it. The key word is through. Through is something that you are going through. You're not going to stay. You're not going to stall. You're going to get through it. And so that compassion engagement is a key component to this entire process. And so I really want to end this with saying, please advocate for your clients. Show your clients how to advocate for themselves, because it's going to be twofold. So often in healthcare, you have to have a backup. I always say, I got to have a phone a friend type of thing. If I'm saying something, I got to have some backup to it. I got to have somebody's name on speed dial or a quote from a certain person that people know in order for them to feel like what I'm saying is valid enough for them to listen. And so I want to encourage you all on this call to advocate for your client and show them how to advocate for themselves, because this is how we're going to make this all different. If a person has given birth, their birthing experience matters. It's no one size fits all approach to any of this. Even when we use the Inspire method, we tailor it to who's in front of us, because everybody's experience is going to be different. There are experiences that are similar, but there's no experience that is the same. And so I want to, again, encourage y'all to advocate. This is a collective effort. And the only way we change and make this whole thing different is if we work together. Thank you.
Can we get a round of applause? Can I hear somebody say amen in the building? So we're dealing with loss tonight.
And amen.
Amen,
Oh,
amen,
we are
amen,
dealing with
amen.
loss
Amen.
tonight.
Amen.
Awesome. This is
Amen,
awesome.
amen.
Awesome, people. Awesome. Amen. Amen.
I am covered in goose pimples. I feel this presentation again. And when you know, even though it's a loss, but you realize that these two presenters go all the way out. Miss Karen, I must say that I'm very intrigued with two things that you tonight. I would love to see your healing wheel again. And also the inspire method. And I would have hoped that we would have gotten our pens and we would have taken down that method, because that inspire method is powerful, powerful. But we would love to see if you can share again with us that healing wheel. All right, so we're gonna have some questions at this time. But before we go into our questions, yes, man, there it is. Probably you'd have to send a picture or something to the association and we would, you know, very nice. And I'm sure that Dr. Curtis would work so that we can get a copy of that. Please, yes, somebody's saying that they copied it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So I'm noticing that persons keep sending in the chat their email addresses and that they're requesting for CME. If you just came in, then you probably would not have heard when Dr. Kurt, you must stay for the entire presentation, at the end of which there'll be an evaluation. You must do that evaluation, answer all the questions in order that you get your CME hours. So it's one of the criteria. Yes, or it is the criteria actually. So after such beautiful presentations, I know you have your questions. They're burning, burning, burning. And so at this time, we are going to ask Ms. Keon Douglas Matthews to go ahead and do the question and answer section for us. We have one presentation to go, but we're going to do these question and answers first. So Ms. Douglas, Mrs. Matthews.
Hi, good evening, everyone. So we're going to look at the questions first from Natasha's presentation, or comments rather. Most of them are comments. So most persons are saying, thanks for sharing, powerful presentation. Miss Abigail McFarlane Grant related that her first child died too. He was full term. She was married for 2 years and there were no warning signs. She just ended up losing the child. And she had a DNC and was in critical condition. And the language that people used to her drove that nail even deeper in the wound. She wanted her husband to grieve like she did. She said I couldn't look at other babies because they reminded me so much of the loss. I too was worried about future pregnancies, but thank God, she got 2 sons afterwards, and it has been 22 years, and it still hurts. Yeah. Other persons are saying thanks for sharing. Nikisha Cooper says, thanks for sharing. I felt so emotional after listening. Yeah, it was deeply touching. Another person said, well done. I'm looking through. Most persons are saying great presentations. Thanks for sharing. I acknowledge Natasha's presentation as well, saying that I felt every word from a personal perspective as well. I too suffer 3 losses. So it's like she was talking for both of us, the shame, the guilt, and so on. Yes. Wonderful presentation again. Deep sharing, very interesting, admire your strength. Yes, a lot of congratulations and thanks for Natasha for the second presentation. Someone is saying, Miss George is saying, I really appreciate this session tonight because I strongly agree that we in the Caribbean fail to meet the psychological need of our clients in general. Loss of neonate in NICU, postpartum depression, etc. I know the main hospital in Antigua as a counselor who has in recent times meet the needs of some of these cases. However, I think more needs to be done, recognizing signs of depression and be more mindful of our language, as oftentimes some statements make the client feel worse. Sometimes it honestly means extending ourselves beyond putting ourselves in other clients' position. All right, other persons are saying, wonderful presentation, amen to what Mrs. Matthews had said. Is it Mrs. Matthews or Miss Matthews? Mrs.?
Mrs.
Mrs. like me, oh, wonderful. All right, wonderful, amen, amen. Great presentation, very touching.
You see that comment by Cardian
By
Sinclair.
Kathy Ann. Am I
So
seeing?
Katie and Sinclair.
Katie
Katie.
Ann. Yeah. I'll read it. She
Yes,
said she lost her first child as well. And then she was placed on the pediatric ward right after being discharged from doing a D&C. She said, I still mourn, but I use my experience to help others. So this is us now taking care of each other. So after having a loss, she was allocated to the pediatric ward.
Oh my God, that's torture.
Yeah, but yes. Okay, go ahead. We have another minute, and then we're going to bring that our last speaker on.
Okay. So
there's a question about
Katie and James Sinclair. Yes. Okay. Most persons are saying very good presentation, awesome presentation. Eslin Alcock, very good presentation. I felt moved by Natasha's presentation. Dorinda Gardner, can we have a recorded copy of presentation? And the presentations will be on the website, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so you can access it there, Miss Gardner. Very great presentation.
Yolanda Bullard had a question.
I'm not
Yolanda
seeing.
Bullard. She said, what about the father? Are they provided with a separate counseling session tailored towards men? So I guess that's for Kay or either one of our speakers, because both of them are involved in groups. So what about the sessions for men?
So we look at it from a family dynamic. Men are welcome to come to our family groups. We always want to be respectful of individuals' preferences. Sometimes, women don't want their spouses to be in there just in case. But we have family night, and so family is a big piece. So it could include whoever the caregiver is, whoever the partner is, whoever's in that household that is helping to take care of the baby and mom. So for us, it is the family dynamic. So we have family night, and because our groups are done weekly, we do family night twice a month. So it just gives that inclusion piece. And we started this in 2020 because of the pandemic. And we wish we had done it prior to. We were always looking for ways to get the partners involved. And this was our way of doing it. So family night twice a month for us is how we are inclusive of the partners. We do have a separate fathers group, but what we find is that the fathers typically come more to family night than they do to the individual group. So that's what's working for us. But we're very inclusive of the caregivers, because that's a very important part of the healing process that's going to have to take place.
Natasha?
Same with babies who live only in our hearts. We encourage the fathers to come, and they do come out, and it's always very encouraging when they do. Sometimes they come and they're very vocal. They have a lot of things to say, and sometimes they come and they sit and they say nothing for the entire session, but they're there, and we acknowledge their presence. We acknowledge what it took for them to get there. And, you know, I make a really big deal over the fact that they're there, you know, and it's wonderful. It's wonderful when they come out and, you know, just to sit and support and learn, and they listen and they hear. And sometimes that's the first time they've heard aspects of grief from their partners. So it's always very encouraging when they're there. And I love when the husbands come out. I have had an interesting experience of having a session with a father and his friends, and they were all military men. And these men came to support their friend who had suffered a loss. So it was me and a lot of really huge men. And, you know, that session was
You're muted. You're muted.
sorry, it reinforced the need for men to have spaces that belong to them, that they can decide how they spend their time. It is so important. And, you know, I would love to see that happen more often, to create that kind of space. I know, you know, my husband isn't much of a talker. He tells everyone I'm the talker of the family. I don't know where he got that from. But, you know, I would imagine that even 7 years after, there will be things that my husband might need to say about what we experienced that he hasn't said to me. And I think it's a wonderful idea. And I want to see it happen. I want to see it happen here in our Caribbean context.
Okay, one last question, and before we move on, because I see that Dr. Clark is here, so we want to move on to give her enough time.
Right.
But this last one says, I saw it, where is it? At what point is counseling terminated after grieving? Because grieving can take a long time. And that word terminated is a very strong word.
Yeah, I mean, it really will depend on the context of the healing that has to take place for you. Can't give you a time frame, because that's the one thing that we learn in loss, that we should never associate time with anything. And so it's about where you are in your healing. And if you decide that you do want to end counseling, just make sure you have some type of support mechanism in place. That's my advice.
And I mean, I would say that if you think of counseling as a commitment to your health and your well-being, then why terminate? Maybe counseling will change, maybe what you do and how often you do it might change, but that commitment to staying healthy and being well should never be terminated. So it really depends on individual situations.
Thank you so much. We thank you. Thank you, everyone. We know we see the questions coming in. We see the comments coming in. Of course, keep sending them in at the end of this presentation that is coming up now. We may be able to get a few more of your questions answered, and we may be able to share a few more of the comments that are being placed on the chat. Tonight, we are going to go into our final presentation. And the topic for this final presentation is clinical and psychosocial aspects of perinatal loss. To do this presentation for us is Dr. Heather Clark, who was Dr. Heather Clark, and her accolades, I'm seeing DNP.
Avoid every mutation.
Please mute your mics. Thank you. Marva Rose Blight, please mute your mic. Thank you. Thank you so much. So Heather Clark, DNP, CNM, CNM, LM, APRN, and FACNM. I'm hoping that she will be able to tell us what those acronyms means. Miss Clark, Heather Clark, was born into humble circumstances on the small island of Barbados into the loving arms of her maternal grandmother, a traditional midwife. After several years of resisting, she finally answered the call to become a midwife. Dr. Heather Clark received her master's degree in midwifery from Columbia University and her doctoral degree from Frontier Nursing University. She currently serves on faculty at the University of Pennsylvania School of Nursing. Dr. Clark's midwifery career spans 42 years. Her clinical practice was primarily focused on providing care for vulnerable, low-income, Black and Brown women, people, and their families within multiple settings, from clients' home and birth centers to tertiary care hospitals. Dr. Clark's doctoral work focused on the impact of racism and toxic stress on persistent maternal child health disparities. In 2002, Dr. Clark discovered the field of pre- and perinatal psychology, which she integrates into her approach to perinatal care. Dr. Clark lectures nationally and internationally, both of trauma and persistent stress, on the physical and mental well-being of mothers and babies before, during, and after pregnancy. Today's talk will focus on the importance of self-care for midwives who provide care for women while attempting to hold a safe space for the discharge of maternal child trauma. Dr. Clark quotes, "We cannot effectively care for others if we do not first care for ourselves." At this time, it is my greatest pleasure to present to you our next presenter in the person of Dr. Heather Clark. Have a seat, relax, and enjoy. Dr. Clark, over to you.
Thank you so very much for that wonderful introduction. And I thank the Caribbean Regional Midwives Association for having me here today. I'm actually today going to be talking about perinatal grief and loss. And I did not send in my updated bio. So I just want to say before I get started, my talk may be a little more academic and touch on some of the clinical aspects of dealing with perinatal loss, particularly miscarriage as midwives. But I want to say how touched I was coming into the end of Kay Matthews' presentation, and before her, Natasha Carlo. They sounded so passionate and compassionate, which is really what women, their partners, and families need in the face of perinatal loss. And I really honor the work that your two organizations are doing. And I'm so happy that you're doing this work within the Caribbean. It's just so heartwarming. And I intend to listen to the recording. I'm really, really excited about that. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen. And okay, okay, I just changed it to multiple participants, but I'm not sure I have the right to do that. Are you able to make me a co-host?
You are a co-host,
Okay.
so just hit
Okay,
share.
there it is. Now it's
Mhm.
coming. Okay. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, we can.
So you're able to
Yes,
see
Doc.
this?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna move it over here. Okay.
Okay. I think we just lost the PowerPoint.
How's
There you
that?
go. Yeah.
Okay, great,
Uh-huh.
perfect. So as I said, I'm going to be talking about perinatal grief and loss. And my slides are a little wordy. I'll apologize for that. So a lot of this material is from the March of Dimes. So perinatal loss or loss of a child at any age. And of course, I'm going to focus more on perinatal loss, but it is one of the most painful experiences that a woman, a family can experience. And it can take a few weeks to a month, usually about 4 to 6 weeks, for one's body to recover from a miscarriage. But it can take months or maybe years or never before the emotional pain is resolved and one can recover emotionally from the loss of a child. Regardless of the length of pregnancy or the life of the child, that baby is real. Right? It is real. And as midwives and care providers, as we've heard this evening, we have to acknowledge that, and we have to use the language that that woman is using and acknowledge that she lost a child. So many women experience a high level of anxiety in subsequent pregnancies, and that will continue at least up until the gestational age at which they had the previous loss. So if that pregnancy was lost at term, then that mother is going to be on pins and needles and have high anxiety and fear throughout the entire pregnancy. And this can impact the way she bonds with the baby, the way she actually allows herself to connect with the baby that is inside of her. And, you know, that has repercussions for the baby as well as the family as a unit. So women need support, and they need support from a variety of backgrounds and resources. And I loved hearing how Shades of Blue and Natasha's organization are really, really focused on that support. And I heard someone in the chat asked about how long do you continue the counseling, and as long as one needs, and certainly it can change. It can go from one-on-one to group counseling. So grief is defined as deep sorrow, especially when it is caused by the death of someone close to you. And that's from the dictionary. Everyone has different ways of dealing with grief and death. And I found that there are 7 stages that are common reactions to grief after death and loss. So there is shock and denial, even if one has some foresight. So someone can have a miscarriage and you know that the loss of the pregnancy is inevitable. And an uncaring provider or an uncaring family member might say, you know, why are you fussing so much? You knew that the baby was no longer, you know, the baby was dead and you were going to lose the pregnancy, but there's no way of preparing for the grief of the loss of a child, even when you know that it's inevitable. There's pain, there's guilt. Women have a tendency to want to blame themselves, to try to determine what was it that they did wrong to cause this to happen. There's lots of confusion. And at some point, there's a lot of anger that person might feel, and bargaining, right? Particularly if, let's say, you have a early rupture of membranes, let's say around 24 weeks, and you're bargaining for every day, every week that baby stays inside and you don't get a temperature so that the baby can survive as long as possible and develop in utero and then survive after. So lots of bargaining that might go on when you're anticipating the potential loss. Of course, there's depression and loneliness. Women tend to feel like nobody else really understands what I'm going through, not even my partner. They just don't get it. So they may turn within and become withdrawn and reflect again on how did this happen? Why did this happen? Is it a punishment from God, or did I do something wrong? At some point there's upward turning, just beginning to see the light, beginning to find a light at the end of the tunnel, and then reconstructing what their life might look like moving on, having another baby, getting rid of materials and equipment that you might have purchased for the baby. And then there's acceptance and hope. But that doesn't mean that there's the end of the grieving, the end of the pain. That might go on for quite some time. So examples of perinatal loss. So there's miscarriage. And that is when a baby dies in utero prior to 20 weeks. And oftentimes the cause is unknown, especially when the loss takes place before the mother is even aware that she was pregnant. So the incidence of miscarriage is 10 to 15% of pregnancies. And that statistic is for women who know that they're pregnant. So it could be much higher than that, because some women will miscarry and didn't know that they were pregnant. The majority of miscarriages take place before the 12-week gestation. And the incidence of miscarriage around 13 to 19 weeks is 1 to 15% of miscarriages in the first trimester. So unfortunately, some women may have more than one miscarriage, and which becomes increasingly more and more difficult and painful to deal with. And women like this can really go into deep stages of depression. So the incidence of recurrent pregnancy loss is about 1 in 100, or 1%. And most instances, about 50 to 70% of the cases are unknown. However, 65% can subsequently go on to have a successful pregnancy. So it's challenging. Counseling is really, really important. That woman needs a lot of support, but it's good if we can reassure them that with the right amount of care, it is possible for them to go on and have a successful pregnancy. Know that throughout the entire pregnancy, right, that woman is really, really going to be anxious and overprotective and perhaps very withdrawn throughout the entire pregnancy until she finally gives birth and holds her baby in her hands. So in the case of repeated miscarriages, or even just single miscarriage, chromosomal abnormalities account for about 50% of all miscarriages, but these are not necessarily genetic problems. These are usually from the result of a blighted ovum. So a woman may have signs and symptoms of pregnancy that develop, and she might be very excited, and then those signs and symptoms begin to go away. So the good news is that because they're not necessarily genetic, they don't necessarily repeat themselves, right? That potential to have a healthy pregnancy does exist. Another reason might be intrauterine fetal demise, and that can happen at any point in the pregnancy. Once fetal heart is established, then at some point the fetal heart ceases. It could be the result of a molar pregnancy, translocation of the DNA, or there could be problems with the uterus or the cervix. So someone may have a septate uterus, where the pregnancy just doesn't have enough room to grow in the uterus that's divided. Asherman syndrome, where there's a lot of scarring within the endometrial tissue, or uterine fibroids. Did I advance? Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Okay, the slide repeated. There could also be cervical insufficiency. So the cervix begins to efface or dilate early in the pregnancy, and there is no chance of cerclage or preventing further dilatation, and eventually the pregnancy is lost. And then there may be the miscarriage may occur as a result of infections. They may be STIs or food poisoning that develop and ultimately lead to miscarriage. Molar pregnancy, another indication or translocation of the DNA. Risk factors for miscarriage. Women who are 35 years and older, we know, may have increased risk. And then there's exposure to toxic substances, smoking, alcohol, significant drug use, whether they're prescribed or illegal. And that's important to understand, that certain prescriptions might ultimately lead to a miscarriage. Exposure to harmful chemicals, particularly in the first trimester where fetal morphogenesis is taking place. If someone is exposed to significant chemicals in the first 3 to 4 weeks from LMP, they could just miscarry. And then I have this list that I thought was helpful to associate with clients that you might see who might be at risk for miscarriage. So someone who's an industrial worker or works as a dental assistant might be exposed to heavy metals that can ultimately cause a miscarriage. People who might work in a lab, or dry cleaners, for example, they're exposed to organic solvents, or tetrachloroethylene. I have a hard time with that word. Semiconductor employees might be exposed to glycol ethers, people who work with electronics. If you have clients who are in any of these industries, you really want to encourage them to protect themselves as much as possible, avoid unnecessary contact, wear protective materials, and maybe they can be reassigned to another section in the industry, in the factory, in the dry cleaning operations, so that they have less exposure. And then there's certain health conditions, right, that may put someone at greater risk for a miscarriage. And as midwives, it's helpful for us to really be mindful of these conditions and provide people with the additional support and anticipatory guidance that they might need. So someone with an autoimmune disorder, like lupus or antiphospholipid syndrome, obesity, we know that can be a tough one, right? Because it's hard to counsel people about weight and weight loss without shaming them. So ideally, we want to try to work with clients before they even get pregnant and impress upon them that, you know, it's not about if they're too fat or shaming them, but it's, the evidence is pretty clear that if you are significantly above your BMI, that you do have significant risk for not just pregnancy loss, but complications during pregnancy. So ideally, you want to address this before someone gets pregnant, but we know that, people will come into the pregnancy with significant BMI, and we want to really, really counsel them and be overly protective of them and their care, and screening for signs of preterm labor and encouraging them to be mindful of those signs also. They may have hormonal problems, so women with PCOS might be at greater risk if they have diabetes, thyroid problems. And then there are tests that we may send women for, right, that can put them at risk for miscarriage. So if we're trying to rule out chromosomal anomalies in the fetus, we may send them for a chorionic villi sample or amniocentesis that might increase their risk of miscarriage. And this one is a little controversial, the excessive caffeine intake, but it's a good idea to encourage people who are coffee lovers, to limit it to one cup a day if they have to continue with caffeine during the pregnancy. Remember that caffeine isn't not just in coffee, so someone may love chocolate or chocolate cake, and they may not even think that they're taking in caffeine. So it's good to remind people and encourage them to limit the intake if possible. So how do we as midwives manage incomplete or missed abortion? Now, I don't know if in all the countries that are represented here, I see a typo, whether or not you have access to prescribing medications, but at least you should be aware of what someone's options are, and provide them with anticipatory guidance and support so that they know what to expect, because sometimes the MD providers are not as forthcoming with information and guidance. So if someone has a fetal heart loss, and they're under 14 weeks and they're pretty stable, right? They're not bleeding, they don't have a fever, they're not in pain, then you do have an option to do expectant management. So this unfortunately can be associated with an increased risk of incomplete expulsion of the products of conception. But for some women, they just can't deal with the idea of, okay, my pregnancy is no longer viable, but I'm just not ready to take a drug to end it, to expel the fetus. I want to wait for it to happen naturally, or I want to wait until I am in a much better emotional state. So if they're stable, that is an option. And 2 to 30% of women will expel the product of conception within 1 week of a missed or an inevitable AB. 52 to 60% will completely expel the products of conception within 2 weeks. And then after that, the rate of expulsion after 2 weeks of the loss, the rate of spontaneous expulsion decreases, so that by the time someone is 6 to 8 weeks, 85 to 90% will completely expel the missed AB. So it is common practice to wait 2 weeks if expectant management is the plan. To wait 2 weeks, counsel the woman on pad watches, make sure if she's bleeding heavily, she should know to contact you or the hospital or whatever your system is, and also to screen for signs of sepsis. So she has severe abdominal pain, fever, foul smell and discharge, then she needs to follow up for immediate medical intervention. And then you want to follow with serial beta HCGs to make sure that they go back to normal. And depending on the length of the pregnancy, that can take an average of 6 weeks. You know, so it may also occur around 4 to 8 weeks where the betas go back to normal and the woman is able to resume normal menses. And of course, a sonogram may be needed to make sure that all the products of conception have been expelled. Generally, if that does not happen, if there's not spontaneous expulsion with expectant management after 2 weeks, then you may want to offer her medical or surgical option. Again, ultimately, she should be on board with that. She should be engaged in the decision, and ultimately the choice should be hers, unless her life is at risk and she's no longer stable. So the medical options that we use in the United States, and I'm fairly sure that you have these options, they're pretty successful if they're administered within 7 days. And generally the use is limited to 12 weeks. So usually after 12 weeks, you may not have the same success with medical options. Up until 12 weeks, though, it's about 80 to 90% effective. And this is generally Cytotec or misoprostol. And that can be given by mouth, 400 micrograms, subcutaneously, 600 micrograms, or vaginally. You know, if somebody's bleeding heavily, though, you kind of might want to avoid vaginal insertion because that may not be as effective. And this can be repeated up to 7 days, again, if the woman is stable. And be sure to add pain medication, because this could be quite painful and traumatic. Of course, the surgical option is a DNC, and it's going to be really, really traumatic for someone. Now, in the case of let's say someone has tested and the fetus is determined that it has significant chromosomal anomalies or other conditions that are not compatible with life, the physician may recommend that, and let's say they're maybe 16, 18, 19, 20 weeks, depending on, again, your protocols in your particular country. It may be recommended this person has a D&E, and that can be, again, very, very traumatic for women. The idea that, you know, as your baby is essentially evacuated. Remember, this is a baby, this is a child, even though it may not be compatible with life. She's being counseled that if this baby goes to term, it may not even go to term. A lot of them are born preterm, that it's not going to survive more than maybe a couple days or a week or so. And they recommend a dilation and extraction. Some women are just not ready for that. That means, you know, having a surgical procedure where your baby's limbs are basically torn apart. And I know this really sounds quite traumatic. One option is to provide, again, that person needs to take the time to make the decision. But one option is to provide some intravenous medication that will eventually stop the fetal heart, and then the procedure can take place. And for that individual, that family, they have some sense that the baby died peacefully, as opposed to a very traumatic and abrupt ending. And remember that if somebody is Rh negative, then they need to be given RhoGAM within 72 hours of the end of the pregnancy. So follow-up after miscarriage. First of all, if the parent is stable, then their decision really need to be considered in how to manage the ending of an incomplete abortion or a pregnancy where life after birth is, there's no chance for the baby living after birth. And then there are so many psychological implications, even in regard to expectant management. What is that woman going through while she's waiting for the products of conception to be expelled? What kind of support does she have? Support should start then, right? It should start once the diagnosis is made and she's assisted with working through her pain and her trauma, or even the decision to end the pregnancy with surgical procedures. We cannot assume that, you know, she has the D&C and she's fine and everything is over. They need to be supported with many, many layers of support. Now, if you have a wonderful organization like Shades of Blue, you know, you want to engage them to step in and refer that client as soon as possible. You want to find out what kind of support she has within her family. You know, many women prefer the support of a loving family, assuming that that family has the capability to provide support. Some families just don't. And where it's her partner. And I'm gonna talk about partners as we go through this presentation a little bit later. So support, 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 counseling, counseling, counseling. Okay, I'm sorry. This can place a lot of stress on the relationship, miscarriage. And as people struggle to go on with their lives, their response from friends, neighbors can be really challenging, having to go back to coworkers, family members, friends, and say, you know, who ask about the baby and explain that the baby is no longer there, that they lost the baby, can be really, really hard. And particularly if women are forced to go back to work, that if they're working women and they can't take time off to really grieve and recover on their own, and then having to go back to work and explain what happened to your coworkers. So in that situation, it's helpful if they send something to their workplace in advance and ask that people don't ask them what's going on, what happened with the pregnancy. So it's very, very individual. And as the midwives, of course, you always want to try to be there and support and listen to that woman and take cues from her and know what resources you have in your community so that you can refer them for ongoing support. It never ends. Support is needs to come in from many different sources and from many, many different people. I can't read that. So my child died. I don't need advice. All I need is you to gently close your mouth, open wide your heart, and walk with me until I can see the color again. I thought that was really powerful. So perinatal loss can happen in many, many different circumstances. And it doesn't have to be just during the pregnancy. It can be after the birth, right? Stillbirth. So of course, we can have intrauterine fetal demise, abruption, preterm premature rupture of membranes, where someone is forced to either end the pregnancy because they develop an infection, or try to hold on to that pregnancy as long as possible and then live weeks, months with the baby in NICU and trying to be there to support that baby as much as possible, as much as they're able to. And, you know, in the case of COVID, I know in the US that was very, very difficult for families to be able to get into the NICU and be there with their babies, particularly when it became inevitable that that baby was not going to make it. Preterm birth, low weight, very low weight. Not only are these families, but or in addition to the loss of their child. SIDS, of course, is really, really traumatic. You know, the baby's there, you're starting to bond with the baby, and then, you know, all of a sudden the baby is no longer alive. Your child might succumb to cardiovascular or neurological conditions or early accidents. I already mentioned conditions that were incompatible with life, like anencephaly or other serious medical conditions. So besides miscarriage, there are multiple other conditions that can take place where women and families can suffer pregnancy loss. So when a baby or child dies, so does the hopes and dreams of being a parent. You know, for many women, once they learn that they're pregnant and they begin to get used and excited about the idea, or maybe they planned a pregnancy, we begin to dream about what that child is going to look like and what we're going to do with that child, and you know, various stages of pregnancy, of parenting that we look forward to. And the entire family grieves. Both parents, including the male partner, might grieve, grandparents, as well as children. And children, people grieve in different ways, right? The birthing parent may not want to talk, may be really, really withdrawn. And those feelings may continue leading up to the death of their child if it's born preterm, or if there's an intrauterine fetal demise. There's a huge tendency to blame oneself and to feel extremely guilty and to really beat up on oneself and be angry and sad and introverted. It is really important that we as midwives not assume, okay, the baby's, you know, the baby's born, it did not survive. And we have to be mindful where we place that person in the hospital as they survive, as they recover from the birth, and ideally place them somewhere where they're not exposed to other children or other parents with babies, and provide them with the resources and the support and referrals that they need. Some women may just want to sleep and they just can't stop crying. They don't want to eat, and they may have nausea and vomiting or other somatic expressions. It's great if they have family or friends or a partner that they can reach out to. And for many women, they do receive relief from religious leaders or turning back to cultural traditions. But even so, they can be easily triggered just hearing the name hearing the name that they had chosen for their baby, or walking down the street and seeing other people with babies. So the emotional loss, as I mentioned before, can be prolonged and go on for weeks, months, and even years. So someone, I was really happy to see that someone mentioned men in the chat. And men can grieve in different ways. They may stay by themselves. They may not want to talk about the loss. They may want to spend more time really engaging in their work and staying away from home to keep their mind off the loss. And they may feel like they have to be strong and tough, not just for their partners, but also to maintain a certain amount of respect from their friends who may not quite understand their feelings and their emotions. They may not feel comfortable or safe showing their emotions, and may think that crying or really expressing their grief can make them seem weak. Some men really have difficulty talking through and working through their grief, particularly if they have not been encouraged throughout their life, their upbringing, to show grief or to talk through their pain. And unfortunately, this kind of behavior can make their partner feel like, make the woman feel like their partner is not really there for them at a time when she really, really does need him to be there. For men, they may feel left out, particularly if the female's family is really centered around her and really keep him out. He may not be included within the grievance circle, particularly if they didn't live together, right? This can be really, really hard for men who lose a child and he wasn't living with his partner, and there's a certain amount of stigma in the lay community that make false assumptions about men. They're not interested in the pregnancy or the baby, or they really couldn't care, or they're not great care providers and they're not responsible. So we have to overcome a lot of that stigma and be certain that we provide the male partners with the kind of support that they also need and encourage them to express how they're feeling. Some of them may also need counseling, and then do as much as we can to work with a couple to really try to pull their relationship together, save the relationship if it's worth saving, right? There may be some intimate partner violence that might be exposed as a result of the loss. And as midwives, we need to be careful to screen for that, as well as to help the male partner feel as supported as he needs to be, because ultimately, the more he's supported, the more he's able to be there for his partner. So children also feel grief, right? And children grieve at any age. Toddlers, they're pre-verbal. They tend to take their cues from the parent and tend to be more clingy. And older children who are verbal, they can feel hurt. They're confused, they're angry, they may act out and demand more attention. And they may have concerns and fears that they might also die. And some of them can blame themselves for their siblings' death. Or they may show no reaction at all. And or they may feel that if they ask questions that they're being rude. So we want to encourage parents to reach out to their children and be patient and loving, and try to listen to them as much as possible, and provide them with support and maybe even counseling that they might need. Some of the things we can encourage parents to do is just be really open and honest and use simple words with their older children as we talk to them and we tell them about the baby's death. They might say things like, the baby didn't grow, or the baby was born too tiny and just couldn't breathe on its own, or the baby's sleeping, or the baby's in heaven. things that the children can understand, that are gentle, and recognize that if they too are fearful that something might happen to them, that we can reassure them as much as possible that, you know, they're not going to die. It's helpful to read stories to them, stories about death and loss. And there are some pretty good children's books that are out there right now. We want to encourage them to talk about how they feel about the baby no longer being there. Remember, whatever dreams they had about being a big brother or a big sister, they're also gone. And we need to be mindful of that and respect that. Sometimes it helps if we can encourage the older sibling to draw pictures about their the baby that was lost, and or find something that they can make to remind them of the baby. They might need counseling also. And it helps to talk to their pediatrician, who might know a good child counselor, and be mindful that if the child is showing different behavior that started at the time where they found out their sibling was no longer living, that we really are mindful to provide them with the resources that they need. Usually a social worker might be able to provide you with those kind of resources for support for older children. But it is important to remember that children also grieve, and they can grieve for years, and might hold some fear or some guilt for years. So we want to make sure they're supported. Grandparents grieve because, you know, whatever dreams they had about having a grandchild, especially if it's their first, they're not able to see or touch or hold that baby. So we as midwives need to be mindful and make sure that they get the kind of support they need, the referrals if they have to. And the way, of course, this impacts the mother that we're caring for is the grandparent may not be able to support her. They may not have the words to talk to her, or to let them know that they love her, and that they're there for them. Grandparents may feel that if they say certain things, words, they may trigger the parent to feel sad and cry, and they may not want them to cry when crying is the thing they might need to do. And some grandparents might feel triggered by the loss of their grandchild if they remember the baby that they lost, right? So it can be kind of complicated, and you may be the person as the midwife to pick up on the grandparents' pain and refer them for any kind of resources that might be available to them. More importantly, it's important for the family to talk to each other, to keep the lines of communication going. If somebody loses more than, if somebody has triplets and they lose one or both, twins, could be triplets too, and they lose one or both of those babies, that's really creates a double bind. Let's say one baby is lost, so that woman is then torn between her feelings of grief and pain and sadness over losing that baby, but then needing to maintain, if she's still pregnant, needing to maintain good habits, diet, rest, all the things, prenatal care that she needs to do to make sure that the baby who survives inside of her continues to grow and get the kind of care that they need. And of course, a parent who loses one twin is going to fear that the other one might also be lost. So we need to provide them the care and reassurance that they need, and that might involve more than one ultrasound, if at all possible. it's also a huge challenge if they lose a baby and then one is born preterm, ends up in the NICU. And that's a constant reminder, right? That you're in the NICU, but you also lost another child. Some NICUs, the nurses provide a special Purple Heart or something to add to the crib so that it represents a child who was lost, and it helps the parent to really zero in on the two babies that she has. Because as far as that parent is concerned, she still has twins, even if one did not make it. So we as nurses and midwives need to consider that that parent is a parent of twins, multiples. There's sadness and joy when they bring the surviving child home, because they might very well have prepared and bought things for both babies, and now there's only one. And the idea of the fact that they had twins can stay with a woman, a couple for years. And we cannot lose sight of the fact that just like someone who lost a singleton, this person might really need counseling and the kind of support that we know is available and was discussed earlier. It's also hard because the family may not want to talk about the lost baby. They may not understand why she's focused on that when she's got a baby that's here and that's alive, and they may not be as supportive as the parent needs them to be. So that's really important, that if at all possible, we can encourage the family and the partner to be mindful of what this woman is feeling, that, on the one hand, she's breastfeeding a baby and she's crying about the one that is lost. And from pre and perinatal psychology, we're learning so much about the surviving twin and how they have a memory, they have an implicit memory of their sibling, and they too might need additional support and counseling as they grow. So as we heard today, it's okay to grieve, it's okay to take time for self. I probably need to wrap things up. It's okay to reach out to friends and family and tell them what kind of support you need, and be open and accepting of any gifts that come from families, friends, as well as from the baby that's lost. And that may be a special keepsake that shows up that you don't know where it came from, or something you found and on a spiritual level that it came from the baby who left. Definitely in grieving, they need referral to resources and lots of rest, healthy food, exercise. Some parents may turn to drugs, alcohol, cigarettes, so we need to be mindful of that. They shouldn't be pumping their breasts unless they intend to donate to a human milk supply, because they will keep making more milk, of course. And this is a situation also where we need to reach out to family members to help assessing the mood and determining whether or not the woman's grief becomes so extreme that they're anticipating self-harm or even suicide. We know that suicide is a major, major cause of maternal death, especially after they lose a child. So I'm just going to share one of these stories in the interest of time. Let's go back to this one. So this is someone who just could not believe that her baby is gone. She said that her and her husband had been trying to get pregnant for months. And they were planning IVF, and then they found out they were pregnant, and she had COVID, and she was scared for the baby, and everything seemed to be going fine. They had an ultrasound, and the baby was fine, and so she relaxed. And then at 7 weeks, she, I'm sorry, 7 weeks she had an ultrasound and there was a fetal heart and the baby was fine, and she began to relax. And then 2 weeks later, her second ultrasound, the doctor told her that there was no fetal heart tone. And she said, I will never forget that moment and the week until I got the abortion surgery. I still cannot believe that I lost my baby. My feet went 10 meters underground. I was devastated. And then all the questioning, did COVID kill my baby? Would it have happened anyway? You know, looking for answers when oftentimes there are no answers. So it helps for people to develop a keepsake, keep mementos of the baby. Some people keep pictures. They develop an album, a keepsake box. It's helpful to have some kind of memorial or ritual to say goodbye to the baby, involve friends and families. Some women find help in keeping a journal, poems, letters, painting a picture of the baby, lighting a candle, whatever spiritual or religious resources one often finds relief in. It's good to go back to those and perhaps speak to a spiritual counselor in addition to support services. And some women find relief in volunteering in other charities, particularly working with women who have also lost a baby. At some point, people do begin to move on. They may get rid of their child's clothes. They may go back to work. They may at some point decide to become pregnant again, resolve a relationship if it ended after the end of the pregnancy. But moving on doesn't necessarily mean forgetting your baby. I'm going to move on. And this graph basically just, I'm not going to go into detail, but it reminds us as midwives that this can be challenging work, particularly if we are exposed to multiple women who lose their babies, and it impacts us on many, many levels. So we need to lean on our other colleagues and our professional training and guidance, and take time to also heal ourselves, because it can be really traumatic and lead us to not want to do this work anymore. And these are a bunch of resources that probably may not be as helpful to you or your clients. These are from the March of Dimes. And I would encourage you very much to lean on resources like the first presenters provided today. And thank you for listening.
Awesome. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Come on, let me see the reactions coming up. Let me see the reactions. I'm seeing them. I'm seeing the reactions. I need to see the reactions. And I'm going to quote from something that I saw somebody wrote. Dr. Clark, you have written a book tonight. You have written a book. I saw somewhere in the chat, somebody posted that. You have written a book tonight, and you spoke factual, and they just keep coming out. They just kept coming out. And it was obvious that based on how the chat was going, that there were persons, you know, who could relate. And we saw there's some questions there that we're going to take. There's also some comments there that we really appreciate. And so, Dr. Clark, we thank you tonight. We thank you, Lady Natasha. Awesome, awesome. Yes, Mommy did well. Mommy did well. All right, and we thank you, Lady Kay. We thank you also. We thank you so much, ladies. You did an awesome job tonight. The chat is just bubbling. And at this time, I'm going to ask we're going to go over again to Lady Kayan Douglas Matthews, who's going to take some more of the questions that are there tonight. And I'm hoping that we can also share some of what you shared with us tonight in terms of comments. There's a lot of them. So at this time, Lady Matthews, over to you.
Thank you, Mrs. McNally. Yes, as Mrs. McNally said, there are many interesting comments and questions, but due to time, we will not be able to do all, but we'll try to do as much as possible. Henry Ernest is saying, for any presenter, could you please share some of the statements you can use to help cope with loss, to comfort yourself, or to comfort your clients? What are some statements that you could share? Any one of the presenters?
I would say to take the process and make it your own. Don't feel rushed. Healing takes time. It is a process. And so it's work that is going to have to happen within you, so it has to involve you. So my advice is don't rush it. Don't listen to the noise. Just listen to yourself and keep moving forward. Keep pushing through.
I agree. Mrs. Samuel is saying counseling and support for mothers is greatly neglected. So I'm guessing that's area we could look into more. Ms. Sinclair saying supervisors don't consider your emotional status after a loss. They put her on the ward with the pediatric ward that the baby is not considering her emotional needs. So I guess we as professionals could look into doing things another way. Renee Roberts said, even in case of before 20 weeks, grief can still be heightened, especially in cases where conception is difficult, or they have fertility issues, or they went through a barrage of treatments, like in vitro. All right. Another question from Samuels is saying, what could cause a loss after week 24? Any one of the presenters? Dr. Clark.
Yeah. After 24 weeks, it could be a number of things: infection, incompetent cervix, so there's early dilatation, and effacement, preterm rupture of membranes. Those are some of the common. Placenta abruption, intrauterine procedure, right? So like a amniocentesis. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that response, Doctor. I hope that answered some of your questions, Suzanne Samuels, and for those who were curious as well. Maureen is saying, what about sperm abnormalities?
If there's a sperm anomaly, and there happens to be a conception, it's more likely that that pregnancy might result in chromosomal anomalies. And so the pregnancy, there's probably going to be early pregnancy loss that can happen in the first trimester, as most miscarriages do. So if the anomaly is severe enough, there's some chromosomal anomalies that come from the sperm or the egg, and they result in different anomalies within the fetus. I'm thinking of chromosome 15, for example. So they will either result in a pregnancy loss or they result in a child that is born with different anomalies, different conditions.
Thank you so much for that response. I do hope that could Miss Abigail Murray please mute her mic? Thank you. All right, so all right. So Miss Debbie A was saying, even though women with loss need support, persons should be careful with their language. Ms. Pinnock is saying no counseling is provided for nurses or midwife with similar losses. And Ms. Winifred is saying excellent presentation, however, I missed part of it because she was driving. All right. Ms. Bell believe that there should be more sensitization session that needs to be held on the maternity ward and health centers with the staff. Some of the times they who are no better actually let their patients down in this regard. And Bullard is saying, thanks so much for the presentation. It was very informative. Right. Another question. Are the patients with intrauterine death at a high-risk clinic of infection while waiting for natural expulsion, at risk for infection while waiting for natural expulsion? Let me ask that again. Are the patients with intrauterine death at a higher risk of infection while waiting for a natural expulsion? That's
Yes. So in early pregnancy, miscarriage, yes, they are at a high risk for infection, particularly if there are ruptured membranes. Anytime somebody ruptures membranes and the pregnancy keeps the pregnancy in, there's a high risk of sepsis, and that's often why the pregnancy will have to be induced because the mother develops an infection. If it's early in the pregnancy, absolutely also, because depending on the conditions that presented and led to the miscarriage, there could be intrauterine infection. Particularly with a missed AB, where some of the products come out and there's some that remain in the uterus. So that it's always important to screen women for infection and then take action, because then her life may be at risk, or her ability to maintain her uterus and have subsequent pregnancies might also be compromised. I did notice that someone earlier wrote in the chat, how long is it too long to grieve? It's never too long to grieve. You know, as long as you have the pain, you have the pain, and nobody can or should be able to tell you that, oh, it's been years now, you need to forget that, you know, because it's, as Kay said, it's inside, right? And you have to heal from the inside. And so, yeah, and then there are things that trigger you, and you think you're well, you think you've healed, you think you can go back to work, you think you can get pregnant again. And you go back to those situations, and all of a sudden it just floods you again, and you've got to deal with it.
All right. One final question that I saw in the chat. Someone was asking if the COVID vaccine can cause a miscarriage.
The evidence does not point to that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Clark and Dr. Is it Dr. K. Matthews or midwife K. Matthews? She's no
Just K Matthews.
Just K
Not
Okay.
just, but yeah, K Matthews.
All right,
And
Mrs. K.
Miss
Matthews
Natasha.
and Mrs. Natasha Carlo, so much for those wonderful presentations and all your insights. I too have learned so much tonight, and I thank you very much. It's over back now to Mrs. McNally to conclude our presentations.
All right, all right, all right. So we thank you. We thank you so much. We thank you, everyone. On behalf of the Caribbean Regional Midwives Association, on behalf of Dr. Shirley Curtis and the wonderful team behind this awesome webinar, I would really want to say a big thank you, a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Heather Clark, Mrs. K. Matthews, and Mrs. Natasha Carlo for really going out all out tonight and really giving us a heartfelt presentations. Tonight we had 3 beautiful presentations and I see the reactions coming in. I see the thumbs up, I see the hand clappings, I see the hearts. Yes, the presentations, you guys went all out and we really appreciate, you know, when you're able to do things like these and you can do it with such passion, then it says a great deal. And so tonight we want to say a very, very big thank you. We thank you tonight. The theme, the topic that dealt with perinatal loss, it is really something that, you know, it is so present wherever we are. And listening to all the presenters and have seen all the statements that are coming in, you know, we from time to time take these things for granted. And especially if we have never been in such situations, we always, you know, we want to probably push it aside. And I see the chat coming, the talks coming in also where us as healthcare workers, having gone through this ourselves, you know, we may not be privileged to have counseling or have the support from our colleagues and stuff. But tonight we were blessed with 3 beautiful ladies who put it all out tonight, and we are grateful. Once again, we want to say thank you. We thank our over 400 participants tonight for taking time out. We thank you tonight for being here. We thank you tonight for participation. And we hope that next month again, we will be able to do another webinar for you. At this time, I'm going to ask our president, Dr. Curtis, if she has any last words for you. Dr. Curtis, over to you.